Have you ever noticed how the things we value most in life are never the ones we can get at any moment? A sunrise, a handwritten letter, a rare gem, a quiet moment of peace. What they all have in common is their rarity. And yet, so many of us live our lives trying to be constantly available, answering every message, attending every meeting, saying yes to every request, as if our worth is measured by how present we are in every space all the time. But what if I told you that being constantly available isn't a sign of value? It's often a sign of being overwhelmed, overcommitted, and overlooked. We've been taught to believe that always showing up earns us appreciation, but in reality, it often earns us exhaustion. The truth is simple yet powerful. People don't value what they see too often. They value what is rare, intentional, and excellent. So today I want to challenge a mindset. I want to invite you into a shift, not to be everywhere, but to be somewhere with purpose. Not to be constantly accessible, but to be unmistakably valuable. Because your worth is not in how often you're seen, it's in the impact you make when you choose to be seen. Scarcity increases value, a principle so fundamental that it governs not only economics, but relationships, opportunities, and even self-worth. When something is rare, when it's not easily accessed or constantly offered, it naturally commands attention, respect, and a higher sense of worth. Think about the world's most precious metals like gold or platinum. Their value doesn't lie in their function alone, but in how difficult they are to find. The same principle applies to people. When your time, energy, and presence are given out too freely, they start to lose their perceived value, no matter how genuinely good, kind, or talented you are. There's a subtle but powerful psychology behind how people perceive availability. When you're always saying yes, always showing up at every beck and call, always quick to respond, it may seem like generosity, but often it's mistaken for neediness or a lack of direction. People begin to assume you don't have anything more pressing or valuable to do. In contrast, when someone has to wait to hear from you, when you thoughtfully choose what you engage in, your responses carry weight. Your presence feels intentional, not automatic, and that difference is profound. This is not to say that being generous with your time is wrong. On the contrary, generosity is beautiful when it is anchored in discernment. The issue arises when availability becomes your default rather than your decision. Constant accessibility often comes from a desire to be liked or needed, but ironically, it results in being overlooked or taken for granted. People start to expect your presence without appreciating it. They begin to assume your yes, and over time, your yes becomes background noise. When you practice a degree of scarcity, when you choose carefully where and how you invest your time, you are communicating a silent but powerful message that your time is meaningful and you are a person of priorities. This isn't arrogance, it's self-respect. You are valuing your own worth first so that others can follow suit. People notice what is rare and they remember it longer. They lean in when you speak, because you don't speak just to fill silence. They value your insight because you're not constantly offering it without intention. In essence, to increase your value, you must regulate your accessibility. People don't chase what they already have constant access to, but they do admire what is selective, intentional, and purposeful. Scarcity isn't about playing hard to get. It's about knowing your worth so clearly that you don't have to prove it through constant presence. Prioritizing purpose over people-pleasing is one of the most empowering shifts a person can make. Many individuals spend a significant portion of their lives trying to gain approval, acceptance, or validation from others, often at the cost of their own vision and peace. People-pleasing is a subtle trap. It disguises itself as kindness, helpfulness, or being a team player, But beneath the surface, it often stems from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of not being liked, or fear of disappointing others. The problem arises when this fear begins to drive your decisions, cloud your judgment, and dilute your purpose. When your actions are constantly shaped by what others might think, you start living reactively instead of intentionally. Your calendar fills up with obligations that don't move you closer to your goals. Your energy is spent solving problems that aren't yours. You say yes when you want to say no, and each yes chips away at your focus, your time, and your identity. The tragedy is that people rarely notice the cost you pay for trying to keep them happy. Meanwhile, your own dreams collect dust in the background, waiting for you to stop being everything to everyone. Living with purpose demands clarity. It asks you to evaluate what truly matters to you, what your values are, what kind of life you want to build, what legacy you want to leave behind. Once that clarity is in place, every decision must be filtered through it. That's where people-pleasing often clashes with purpose. Because when you begin to live with clear direction, some people will misunderstand you. They may even resent the boundaries you set or the focus you display. But living with purpose requires the courage to disappoint others occasionally in order to stay true to yourself consistently. There's a quiet strength in choosing purpose over popularity. It doesn't always gain applause, but it builds a life of depth and meaning. People may not always agree with your choices, but they will eventually respect your integrity. And those who don't understand may not be your people to begin with. The more aligned you become with your purpose, the less tolerance you'll have for distractions disguised as obligation. You start realizing that saying no to one thing is saying yes to something far more important: your peace, your passion, your growth. In a world where approval is a currency and likes can feel like validation, choosing to honor your purpose instead of public opinion is a rare and powerful act. It requires strength, self-awareness, and the willingness to be misunderstood for the sake of staying true to who you are and what you're here to do. Guarding your energy and attention is one of the most vital disciplines in a world that constantly demands both. Every day, countless distractions compete for your focus. Notifications, messages, meetings, social obligations, unsolicited opinions, and endless to-do lists. Without intentional boundaries, you can find yourself drained, not by one great challenge, but by 1,000 small interruptions. Energy and attention are not infinite resources. Unlike time, which moves forward regardless of how it's used, energy and focus can be nurtured, depleted, and directed. When wasted, they leave you scattered. When protected, they empower you to do deep, meaningful work. There's a quiet but constant cost to being over-accessible. When you're always available, always responding, always reacting, your mind becomes fragmented. You never truly settle into anything. The depth of your thinking begins to suffer. Your creativity flattens. Even your emotions get frayed at the edges. You may find yourself exhausted without knowing why, not realizing that your energy has been leaking through endless micro-interactions and distractions. Often, people believe they are just tired or unmotivated, but in reality, their attention has been stretched too thin, pulled in directions that don't align with what they care about most. Being mindful of where your energy flows is an act of self-respect. Just as you wouldn't hand your house keys to anyone who walks by, you shouldn't offer your mental space to every voice, every request, or every piece of information that comes your way. This means being discerning about your commitments, choosing your battles wisely, and creating space in your day that is uninterrupted and undiluted. You do not owe everyone an instant reply. You do not have to attend every event, answer every call, or scroll through every feed. There is strength in turning away from the noise, not because you don't care, but because you do care deeply about what truly matters. True focus is a superpower in a distracted world. It allows you to build momentum, to enter flow states where your best ideas and efforts emerge. Guarding your energy doesn't mean isolating yourself. It means aligning your energy with your values. You begin to say yes to things that bring purpose and no to things that bring only pressure. Over time, this shift transforms the way you work, relate, and live. You stop moving from task to task out of urgency and start moving with intention. You become less reactive and more creative. Your presence, instead of being diluted across many things, becomes powerful in a few. And in that focused, protected state, you are not just productive, you are impactful. Letting excellence be your calling card means showing up in every situation with a spirit of intention, depth, and mastery. It's the difference between doing something just to get it done and doing it with the mindset that your work represents who you are. Excellence isn't perfection, it's presence. It's about caring enough to bring your best to the table, regardless of whether anyone is watching. When you make excellence your standard, your value begins to speak for itself, and you no longer need to rely on visibility to prove your worth. In a world where many chase attention by being constantly available, those who commit to quality over quantity naturally rise. They don't show up to every event, accept every project, or jump into every conversation. Instead, they wait until they can bring something meaningful. Their contributions are thoughtful. Their work carries weight. Their words are not just heard, but remembered. This creates a lasting impression. People begin to associate your presence not with frequency, but with significance. You may not always be around, but when you are, you shift the atmosphere. Excellence also builds credibility over time. It's not built through loud claims or superficial charm, but through quiet consistency. People start to trust that when you speak, it matters. When you commit, you deliver. And when you act, you elevate. That trust is earned, not demanded. It is not a result of how often you show up, but how well you do so. It's easy to be visible. It's harder and more valuable to be reliable, to be the kind of person others know they can count on. Not just to be present, but to bring purpose, clarity, and execution. Excellence requires preparation. It asks you to go the extra mile, even when it's inconvenient. It asks for discipline, even when no one will notice the effort. It's about building something lasting instead of chasing quick validation. And the beauty of this approach is that over time, your excellence begins to attract the very opportunities others chase with noise. People come to you not because you're always available, but because when you are, you deliver more than expected. Your value grows every time you make excellence a habit. You become known not for being everywhere, but for being extraordinary where it matters. You don't need to advertise your worth when your work carries your signature. That becomes your calling card, a silent but powerful introduction that speaks long before you do. Healthy boundaries are one of the clearest signs of self-respect. They're not walls built to keep others out, but fences that define where you end and where others begin. Without boundaries, life can become chaotic, relationships can turn draining, and time can feel constantly hijacked by other people's demands. The absence of boundaries often comes from a place of wanting to be helpful, liked, or needed. But over time, saying yes too often leads to inner conflict, resentment, and burnout. Setting limits isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's how you protect your peace, your priorities, and your purpose. When you have no clear lines between what's yours and what belongs to others, you begin to carry burdens that aren't yours to hold. You overextend. You apologize for needing rest. You agree to things that leave you drained. And slowly, you start to disconnect from your own needs, your own goals, and even your own identity. Boundaries act like a compass, pointing you back to yourself. They remind you that your time is valuable, your energy is sacred, and your presence is not to be distributed freely without thought. People often confuse availability with kindness, but true kindness includes kindness to yourself. It's not about always being there, it's about being there with intention. A boundary is a way of saying, I care about you, but I also care about me. It allows you to give from a place of strength, not obligation. You can be generous without being depleted. You can be supportive without being consumed. And when you model healthy boundaries, you teach others how to treat you with respect, not expectation. Boundaries also clarify relationships. When you set them, the right people won't be offended. They'll understand. They'll respect the time you take for yourself. They'll value your no as much as your yes. And those who don't respect your limits often benefited from your lack of them. That's not a reason to reinforce it. Your relationships become healthier not when you give more of yourself, but when you show up fully because you've protected the parts of you that matter. Living without boundaries often leads to people valuing your availability more than your actual value. But when you draw a clear line and stand by it, something shifts. People begin to take your presence seriously. They recognize that your time isn't a default option, it's a conscious choice. And that choice becomes more meaningful when it's rare, intentional, and rooted in self-respect. Leaving a legacy, not just a footprint, means living in such a way that your presence has lasting impact, even after you're no longer around. It's about doing more than just being seen. It's about being remembered for how you made others feel, for the change you sparked, for the truth you stood for. A footprint can be washed away with the next wave, but a legacy endures. It's the echo of your values, your work, your relationships, and your decisions. It lives in people's stories, in the lessons you taught, in the inspiration you left behind. And building that kind of legacy requires intention. Many people stay busy, constantly on the move, filling calendars and conversations with activity. But activity is not the same as impact. You can attend every meeting, be part of every discussion, and still leave no meaningful trace. Being constantly available might give the illusion of involvement, but legacy is never built on presence alone. It's built on purpose. It comes from choosing depth over distraction, from pouring yourself into what matters most, and from standing for something greater than convenience. To leave a legacy, you must be more than present, you must be purposeful. That means investing your time in things that align with your core values. It means speaking, not just to be heard, but to uplift, to challenge, or to inspire. It means mentoring others, lifting people up, creating things that endure, or building systems that outlast your role. You begin to measure your days not by how many people you saw, but by what kind of effect you had on them. Did you leave them better, stronger, wiser, more hopeful? What sets a legacy apart is that it lives beyond the moment, a kind word that lifts someone in their darkest hour, a piece of work that continues to serve others long after you've moved on, a boundary you modeled that taught others to value themselves. These are not grand gestures, they're intentional ones, and they are remembered not because they were loud, but because they were meaningful. In contrast, simply being available can make your presence feel routine, forgettable. When people always expect you to show up, they may stop noticing when you do. But when you're deliberate about where you give your attention, your presence becomes more powerful. You leave traces of significance. That's how you build something lasting, not by showing up everywhere, but by choosing to show up fully where it matters most. So as we close this conversation, let this truth settle deeply within you. You were not born to be constantly available. You were born to be profoundly valuable. Your time, your energy, your presence, they are not endless resources to be spent at every request. They are sacred, powerful tools meant to be directed with purpose, not scattered for approval. When you begin to live with intention, when you say no, not out of rejection, but out of respect for your calling, something shifts. People stop expecting you to simply show up and start waiting for the moment when you do. Your presence begins to carry weight. Your silence speaks. Your boundaries are not seen as barriers, but as markers of a life lived with clarity. Let your excellence be the echo that follows you. Let your purpose speak louder than your availability. And above all, let your legacy be measured, not by how many places you stood in. Be valuable, not available. Not just for the applause of the moment, but for the legacy that will live long after the room grows quiet. Thank you.